Imani Omowole stared at the calendar in the reception area of the clinic where she worked as a nurse. Tuesday, August 11th, the day of her scheduled checkup. A day she both looked forward to and dreaded every 3 months. Since childhood, Imani had been haunted by the fear of illness. Not colds or flu, real illnesses, the kind that take away your control over your own body, slowly but surely destroying your life. That was how multiple sclerosis took her mother. Imani was 12 when her mother stumbled for the first time, dropping her breakfast tray. 6 years later, she could no longer feed herself. "Miss Omowole?" Vanessa, a colleague from the lab, peeked into the reception area. "You didn't respond to my message. Your results are ready." Imani frowned. Usually, the test results were sent to her email. "Why weren't they sent as usual?" Vanessa hesitated. "Doctor, Parks asked me to give this to you personally." She held out a sealed white envelope. "He said he wants to talk to you when you get the results." A chill ran down Imani's spine. She slowly took the envelope. Vanessa shifted awkwardly from foot to foot. "I'll go finish up with the morning samples." Imani nodded, mechanically stroking the edge of the envelope. After Vanessa left, she stared at the white paper for another minute, then carefully opened it. She didn't need to read the whole sheet. Her eyes immediately fell on the line highlighted in red, HIV positive. At first, she felt nothing but a strange numbness. Then her mother's voice began to echo in her head. "Sometimes it seems like illness is a bad joke. First you refuse to believe it, then you get angry, and then there's nothing you can do." In a daze, Imani got up and slowly made her way to Dr. Park's office. She knocked. She waited for a response. She entered. "Ah, Imani." Dr. Parks, a tall man with a neatly trimmed beard, looked up from his monitor. "Have a seat." Imani silently handed him the sheet with the results. "This is a mistake," she said. Her voice sounded surprisingly calm. Dr. Parks looked closely at the test results, then at her. "We can do a retest, Imani, but the results are very conclusive." He paused. "Have you noticed any symptoms? Unusual fatigue? Frequent colds? Weight loss?" Imani slowly sank into a chair, clutching the strap of her bag so tightly that her knuckles turned white. "I've been tired for the last few months, and I've had a fever a couple of times, but I thought it was just stress at work." She remembered how 3 weeks ago she had slept through the whole Saturday, explaining to Jamal that she was exhausted. Her husband had even joked that she was working 2 jobs. "Imani, HIV is not a death sentence these days." Dr. Park's soft voice broke through her thoughts. "Modern therapy allows you to lead a virtually normal life. The viral load can become undetectable." Imani didn't hear what he said next. She saw her mother's face in the last months of her life. Exhausted, with dull eyes. "Sweetheart, the worst thing about this disease isn't the pain itself. It's that it never goes away. You wake up with it and you go to sleep with it." "I need to talk to my husband," she said suddenly, interrupting the doctor's explanation. Parks nodded. "Of course. But first we'll do a repeat test. And Imani, you should see our psychologist. It's an important part of the treatment." "I'm a healthcare professional myself, Doctor. Parks, I know the protocol." Imani stood up. "I'm sorry, I need to—" She didn't finish and left the office. She stood in the clinic bathroom for a long time, leaning against the sink. The mirror reflected a woman with a frozen face and empty eyes. "Jamal and I have been together for 7 years. We both got tested before we got married." The thoughts spun around in her head, finding no explanation. Imani washed her face with cold water, dried her face with a paper towel, and left. She called the head nurse, saying she wasn't feeling well and was taking the day off. Then she got in her car but didn't drive home. Instead, she headed for the factory where Jamal worked. As she pulled into the parking lot, she saw that the shift had already ended. Groups of workers were leaving the gate. Imani spotted Raymond Ford, Jamal's colleague and friend. She rolled down the window and called out to him. "Raymond, is Jamal still inside?" The man turned around, clearly surprised by her appearance. "Imani, no, he left early. He said he had somewhere to go." Something in his voice, a fleeting hesitation, made her wary. "Where exactly?" Raymond shifted from foot to foot, clearly uncomfortable. "Look, I don't want to get involved in other people's business." "Raymond, Imani's voice was quiet, but there was a note in it that couldn't be ignored. "What's going on?" The man sighed and moved closer to the car. "Listen, this may not mean anything, but—" He lowered his voice. "Jamal's been seeing someone. I didn't want to say anything. I thought maybe it was just a phase." Imani felt a chill run through her. She gripped the steering wheel tighter. "How long has this been going on?" 3 months, maybe 4. I've seen them a few times." "Who is she?" "A waitress at the Blue Lotus. She works the evening shift. That's all I know, Imani, I swear." She nodded silently. "Thanks, Raymond." "Listen, maybe we shouldn't—" He started, but Imani had already rolled up the window and started the engine. On the way home, she felt strangely calm. It was as if someone else was driving, and the real Imani was watching from the side. A chain of events formed in her mind. Jamal had started staying late at work about 3 months ago. Around the same time, strange phone calls began, which he answered by leaving the room. New cologne. Shirts he hadn't worn before. Imani didn't immediately notice that she had pulled up to the house, a modest 2-story building where she and Jamal rented an apartment on the 2nd floor. Her husband's car was parked at the entrance. Imani took a deep breath and got out of her car. Jamal was sitting in the living room in front of the TV, sipping beer from a bottle. Seeing his wife, he raised his eyebrows in surprise. "Honey, you're early. Did something happen?" Imani silently placed the envelope with the test results on the coffee table. Jamal picked it up, opened it, and scanned the lines. His face changed dramatically. "What the hell is this?" He looked genuinely shocked. "This has to be a mistake." "I thought so too," Imani said calmly. "But then I stopped by your work and ran into Raymond." Jamal froze, his gaze darting to his wife's face, then back to the test results. "Imani, listen. How many women have you had in the last 7 years, Jamal?" She interrupted, her voice still surprisingly calm. "Or was it just that waitress from the Blue Lotus?" Jamal put the bottle on the table and stood up. "It's not what you think. It was only a couple of times." "You're lying," Imani shook her head. "Raymond saw you together for months. You betrayed me, and now you're lying to my face." "Fine," Jamal threw his hands up. "Yes, I had an affair, but I never wanted to hurt you. She means nothing to me." "What about HIV, Jamal? Does that mean nothing to you too?" He recoiled. No, that can't be. I couldn't. You must have gotten the test results wrong. I had them done at my clinic." Imani's voice broke with rage for the first time. "You infected me! Do you understand? You brought a deadly disease into our home!" "I didn't know," Jamal shouted. "I swear to you, I didn't know." "How could I have known?" "You should have used protection." Imani stepped toward him. "Or do you think people have AIDS written on their foreheads?" She looked healthy. How was I supposed to know? Imani laughed, a dry, lifeless laugh. "Are you really that stupid, or are you just pretending? You've destroyed me, Jamal. You've destroyed our life, our future." Imani saw her mother's face again before her eyes, gaunt, ravaged by illness. All these years she had worked hard to escape this nightmare, getting tested, watching her health. And it all ended because of the betrayal of the person she trusted most. "Imani, we'll get through this." Jamal took a step toward her, reaching out his hand. "I've heard there are medicines now. People have been living with this for decades." "Don't touch me!" She recoiled as if she had been struck. "Don't you ever touch me again!" Imani went into the kitchen. Her gaze fell on the drawer where the knives were kept. She took out a large carving knife, the one she had bought for cutting vegetables, with a comfortable handle and a perfectly sharp blade. She heard Jamal's footsteps behind her. "Imani, please," he began. She turned slowly, clutching the knife in her hand. "Do you know how my mother died?" she asked quietly. 7 years. 7 years she wasted away, piece by piece. First her legs gave out, then her arms. Then she lost control of her bladder. In the end, she couldn't even speak. She just lay there and stared at the ceiling. Imani took a step toward her husband. "I swore I would never let that happen to me. Never." Jamal backed away, putting his hands up in front of him. "Baby, let's talk. Put the knife down." I hate you, Imani whispered. I hate you for what you did to me. Something in her eyes made Jamal realize that words were useless. He turned and rushed for the door, but Imani was faster. Madness gave her strength. She grabbed him by the collar and pushed him hard. Jamal lost his balance and fell on his back. And then there was only screaming, screams of pain, horror, and disbelief as the knife came down, finding its target. Detective Lamont Terrell pulled up to the two-story house on Clinton Street as the clock on the dashboard read 10:30 p.m. The sky was overcast, and the air was stifling. The rain promised by the weather forecast was slow to fall on the asphalt, which had been baking all day. The flashing lights of the police cars cast red and blue reflections on the walls of the houses and the faces of the onlookers gathered behind the yellow police tape. "What do we have, Jenkins?" Terrell asked, approaching a patrolman who was making notes in his notebook. "Cold weapon assault, sir. Neighbors heard screams and called 911. The victim is Jamal Omowole, 35 years old, taken to Hamilton Memorial Hospital with severe injuries to the groin area. The suspect is his wife, Imani Omowole, 30 years old. She's still inside, not moving and not responding to anyone." Terrell nodded and looked around. It was a typical working-class neighborhood, modest houses, beat-up cars in the driveways, cheap chain stores on the corners. Not the worst place in Hamilton, but not exactly a place where life was kind to its residents. Who was first on the scene? "Officers Baker and Green, sir. They found the suspect sitting on the kitchen floor with a bloody knife in her hands. The victim was found there too, conscious but bleeding profusely. According to the medics, he lost about 2 liters of blood, but he'll survive. Judging by the nature of the wounds..." "Castration, sir," Jenkins replied in a low voice. "The doctors say there's no chance of restoring, functionality." Terrell grimaced. In 20 years of service, he had seen a lot, but some things still made him cringe inside. "What's the status of the suspect?" "No change." The paramedic examined her at the scene. She's physically fine, but in a state of deep shock. She refuses to speak and is barely responding to external stimuli. Terrell adjusted his tie and headed for the entrance to the house. Inside, a team of forensic investigators was at work, taking photographs, collecting samples, and measuring distances. It was a typical apartment of a modestly well-off family. Inexpensive but neat furniture, a few framed photographs, a television on the wall. The kitchen floor was covered in blood. Wide brown streaks led to the front door, traces left by the paramedics who had carried the victim out. In the corner, leaning against the refrigerator, sat a black woman. Her eyes were open but seemed blind. There were bloodstains on her white medical uniform, and her hands lay on her knees, seemingly lifeless. Crouching next to her was a female officer trying to make contact. "Mrs. Omowole," she said softly. "Can you hear me? Do you need anything? Maybe some water?" There was no response. "Officer Hendricks," Terrell said to her. "Any progress?" The woman shook her head. "None, detective. She's been like this since we arrived. The paramedics say it's dissociative amnesia, a defensive reaction to extreme stress." Terrell moved closer and crouched down next to Imani. "Mrs. Omowole, I'm Detective Lamont Terrell. I'm here to help you figure out what happened." He paused, studying her face. "Do you understand what I'm saying?" For a split second, he thought he saw a glimmer of awareness in her eyes, but then they went blank again. "We need to get her to the station," he said, standing up. "Have a police psychologist examine her." As he left the kitchen, Terrell bumped into a crime scene technician who handed him a clear plastic bag containing evidence. "Found on the living room table, detective. Looks like medical test results. Take a look at the highlighted line." Terrell looked through the plastic at the piece of paper. HIV positive was marked in red. "Interesting," he muttered. "That could explain the motive. Officer Hendricks, have Mrs. Omowole see a doctor as well as a psychologist. We need to confirm her HIV status and find out if she works in a medical facility. The form looks like a hospital form." "Yes, sir." Terrell returned to the street, where he was approached by a heavy-set, middle-aged African-American woman in a robe thrown over her nightgown. "Detective?" "I'm Gloria Wilson. I live in the apartment next door. I called the police." "Thank you for coming, Mrs. Wilson. Tell me what you heard or saw today." The woman nervously fiddled with the edge of her robe. "At first it was just voices. They often argue, like all married couples. But then they started shouting louder. She was screaming something about an illness, and he was defending himself. Then there was a terrible scream, a man's scream, full of pain. She shrugged. I called the police right away. Do you know the Omawolis well? Not very well. They moved in about 3 years ago. Quiet neighbors, no problems before. She's a nurse, works at the clinic. He works at the Peterson factory as far as I know. Did you notice any signs of domestic violence? Arguments, shouting, signs of beatings? The woman thought for a moment. They've been arguing a lot in recent months, but fighting? No, never. She always seemed calm, even withdrawn, and he could get loud after a couple of beers with his friends, but he wasn't violent. Did you see anyone come to their house today? Anyone unusual? No, no one. I got home from work around 6, and it was quiet until the screams. Terrell nodded and took out his business card. Thanks for your help, Mrs. Wilson. If you remember anything else, give me a call. The woman took the card and shuffled back to the house. The detective headed for his car when the radio on his belt came to life. Detective Terrell, there's a woman at the entrance to the cordon claiming to be a friend of the suspect. Her name is Baxter. Let her through, Terrell replied, returning to the yellow tape. A short black woman with a look of concern on her face approached him, accompanied by a patrol officer. I'm Tisha Baxter, she said. What happened to Imani? Vanessa from the lab called me and said the police were here. Miss Baxter, I'm Detective Lamont Terrell. There's been an incident involving Mrs. Omawol and her husband. Mr. Omawol has been taken to the hospital with serious injuries. Mrs. Omawol has been taken into custody. Oh my God, Tisha gasped. It's because of the tests, isn't it? She found out the results. Terrell looked at her intently. Are you aware of her HIV status? Vanessa told me today. Imani is in shock. Taisha trailed off. Can I see her? Not yet. Mrs. Omawoli is in a state of shock and is not responding to her surroundings. She'll be taken to the station soon. Terrell paused. Miss Baxter, you seem to know Mrs. Omawol well. I need any information that might help me understand what happened. Taisha looked around nervously. I know Imani from college. We studied nursing together. She has some psychological issues, phobias related to illness. Go on. Her mother died of multiple sclerosis when Imani was a teenager. It was long and painful. Imani is terrified of getting sick with something incurable more than anything else in the world. That's why she became a nurse, to better understand her body and monitor her health. Tisha paused. She gets tested every 3 months for every possible disease. Some people think it's excessive, but for her, it's a way to cope with her fear. And today, she found out she has HIV, Terrell said thoughtfully. Yes, it's her worst nightmare. You see, for Imani, illness isn't just a diagnosis. It's a return to her childhood when she was helpless and watched her mother die. Taisha shook her head. I can't imagine what was going through her mind when she found out. What can you tell me about Jamal Omawole? Taisha frowned. Jamal. He's a good guy overall, but he has issues with fidelity. Imani never said anything directly, but I could tell. She would shut down when the conversation turned to him. Do you think he could have infected her with HIV through an extramarital affair? I don't know for sure, but if so, imagine how Imani felt. Her husband didn't just betray her. He brought into her life the thing she feared most. Terrell nodded, making notes in his notebook. Miss Baxter, you said you knew Mrs. Omawol from college. Did she ever have episodes like this before? Violence, loss of control? Taisha shook her head. Never. Imani has always been reserved, even overly so. She controlled every aspect of her life, especially when it came to her health. She paused. But I've never seen her in a situation like this. A diagnosis like this is the end of the world for her. Thank you for the information, Miss Baxter. Terrell handed her his business card. If you remember anything else that might help, please call. And please don't leave town anytime soon. I may need your official statement. Taisha took the card and nodded. Can I at least find out how she is? And what about Jamal? Mrs. Omawole is physically unharmed, but she's in shock. Mr. Omawole suffered serious injuries, but his life is not in danger. Taisha covered her mouth with her hand. Oh my God, what did she do? I'm sorry, but I can't disclose any details about the incident. Terrell paused. But I think you can visit Mr. O'Moole at Memorial Hospital tomorrow. Tisha nodded and slowly walked away. Terrell watched her go, lost in thought. The story was becoming clearer, but no less tragic. When he returned to the house, he saw the officers leading Imani away. She walked slowly, mechanically, staring past the people around her. She was put into a patrol car, and Terrell signaled for it to follow. "Jenkins," he said to the patrolman, "I'm going to the hospital to talk to Mr. Omawole if he's in a condition to give a statement. Finish up here and wait for the crime scene report." "Yes, sir." Hamilton Memorial Hospital greeted Terrell with bright lights and the smell of antiseptics. A tired nurse was on duty at the registration desk. "Detective Lamont Terrell, Hamilton Police Department. I need to talk to a patient who was brought in today, Jamal Omawole." The nurse checked the computer. "He's in the recovery room on the 3rd floor, but I'm not sure he's able to talk. He had major surgery and is on heavy pain medication. I'll just ask a couple of questions and be on my way." The nurse shrugged. "Ask Dr. Nguyen. He's his patient." On the 3rd floor, Terrell found a short Vietnamese man in a white coat studying a medical chart. "Dr. Nguyen, I'm Detective Terrell. Can I talk to Jamal Omawole?" The doctor looked up from his papers and stared at the detective. "He just came out of surgery, Detective. We stopped the bleeding and performed initial reconstruction, but the damage is extensive." The doctor shook his head. If help had arrived 10 minutes later, he would have died from blood loss. "Is he conscious?" "He's coming around periodically, but he's disoriented from the medication. I don't think we'll get much out of him today." "I have to at least try, doctor. It's important for the investigation." Nguyen sighed. 5 minutes, no more. And if I tell you to leave, you leave without question." Room 210. Terrell nodded and headed down the hallway. Jamal Omawole lay in a small, dimly lit room. His skin looked gray from blood loss. An IV tube was attached to his arm, and he was wearing an oxygen mask. Terrell quietly approached the bed. "Mr. Omawole? Can you hear me?" The man's eyelids fluttered, and he slowly opened his eyes. His gaze was cloudy and unfocused. "I'm Detective Lamont Terrell. I'm investigating the incident involving your wife. Can you tell me what happened?" Jamal stirred slightly and raised his hand as if trying to remove the mask. Terrell helped him. His voice was hoarse, barely audible. "She found out about your affair?" Terrell asked quietly. Jamal nodded almost imperceptibly. "And about the HIV?" Another weak nod. She went crazy. I've never seen her like that. She was screaming that I killed her." "Did you know about your HIV status before today, Mr. Omawole?" Jamal closed his eyes, and for a moment Terrell thought he had lost consciousness. But then the man opened them again, and they were filled with pain, not physical, but emotional. "I suspected. I was weak, unprotected." "With the woman from Blue Lotus?" Surprise flashed across Jamal's face. "How did you—" "It doesn't matter. Did you know and not tell your wife?" "I was afraid," Jamal whispered. "She always was afraid of disease. Her mother—" He didn't finish his sentence. His breathing quickened, and the monitor next to the bed beeped more frequently. "That's enough, Detective." Dr. Nguyen entered the room. "He needs rest." Terrell nodded and stepped out into the hallway. The picture of what had happened was becoming clearer, and it did not bode well for Imani Omawole. Technically, she had committed a serious crime, but the circumstances— The phone in his pocket vibrated. Terrell took it out and saw a message from Officer Hendricks. "The suspect has started responding to those around her. She seems disoriented, asking where she is and what happened. She doesn't seem to remember the incident." Terrell put his phone away and looked at his watch. It was almost 2 in the morning. The long day was not over yet, and a difficult interrogation lay ahead. When he returned to the station, Imani had already been placed in an interrogation room. She was sitting at a table, hugging herself as if she were cold. Her eyes were no longer empty. Now they were filled with fear and confusion. "Mrs. Omawole." Terrell sat down across from her. My name is Detective Lamont Terrell. Do you understand where you are? Imani nodded slowly. You're at the police station, but I don't understand why. What happened? Terrell studied her face closely. It seemed that her amnesia was not feigned. What's the last thing you remember? Imani frowned, trying to concentrate. I came home. Jamal was there. We were talking about... Her eyes suddenly widened. Oh my God, the tests. I have HIV, and Jamal, he confessed that he had been cheating on me. What happened next, Mrs. Omawali? Imani closed her eyes, trying to remember. I was so angry, so scared. I went to the kitchen. She stopped, her hands beginning to shake. I don't remember. What did I do? Where's Jamal? Your husband is in the hospital, Mrs. Omawal. You seriously injured him. Injured? How? Imani looked genuinely shocked. You don't remember picking up the kitchen knife? Imani shook her head, then suddenly froze. Her face contorted in horror. Oh my God, she whispered. I did that? I crippled him? You castrated your husband, Mrs. Omawal, Terrell said quietly. He only survived because a neighbor called an ambulance quickly. Imani made a strange sound, somewhere between a sob and a moan, and covered her face with her hands. No. It wasn't me. I couldn't. I'm a nurse. I help people. I don't... You were in a state of shock, Mrs. Omawal. Severe emotional trauma can cause temporary clouding of the mind. Terrell paused. I spoke with your friend, Tisha Baxter. She told me about your phobia of disease, about your mother's death. Imani lowered her hands and looked at the detective with reddened eyes. My mother was dying for 7 years. It was unbearable. She took a deep breath. When I found out I had HIV, I felt like my life was over. And then I found out that Jamal, that he knew and didn't tell me, that he kept sleeping with me, knowing he could infect me. Her voice trembled, but I didn't want to hurt him. I don't remember wanting to. Have you ever had memory lapses before, Mrs. Omawal? Moments when you didn't remember what you were doing? Imani shook her head. Never. I've always been in control. Always. Terrell nodded and closed his notebook. Okay, that's enough for today. You need some rest. A psychiatrist will examine you tomorrow and we'll continue our conversation. He stood up. You will be charged with aggravated assault, Mrs. Omawoli, but given the circumstances, your attorney may be able to build a defense based on temporary insanity. Imani stared at him blankly, as if she didn't understand or care about the legal aspects of the matter. Can I see Jamal? She asked quietly. I'm afraid that won't be possible. You will now be taken to a cell. Tomorrow there will be a preliminary hearing in your case, and the judge will decide whether you can be released on bail. Imani nodded and allowed Officer Hendricks to lead her away without protest. Terrell watched her go, thinking about how thin the line between sanity and insanity was, and how easily a person could cross that line when confronted with something that destroyed their world. Lamont Terrell sat at his desk at the Hamilton Police Department, sorting through the Omawole case files. 3 days had passed since the incident. Imani was in a holding cell. Jamal was still in the hospital. The press had already gotten wind of what had happened, and the morning newspapers were full of screaming headlines. Nurse castrates husband in revenge. Bloody revenge after infidelity. Terrell rubbed his nose. The case seemed clear, but something bothered him. He looked over the medical report again. Imani Omawole, 30 years old, confirmed HIV positive. Symptoms consistent with early stage. Estimated infection 3 to 6 months ago. The phone on the desk rang. Detective Terrell here. Sir, this is Jenkins. Raymond Ford has arrived to give a statement. Take him to the interrogation room. Terrell gathered his papers and headed for the interrogation room. Raymond Ford, a stocky man with a closely cropped head, drummed his fingers nervously on the table. Mr. Ford. Terrell sat down across from him. Thank you for coming. I need your statement regarding Jamal Omawole. Raymond nodded. Anything I can. Terrible business, huh? I never would have thought Imani capable of that. She always seemed so quiet. You work with Jamal at the Peterson factory, right? Yeah, for 5 years. We're not exactly friends, but, work buddies. We'd have a drink after work sometimes. And you knew about his relationship with the waitress at the Blue Lotus? Raymond grimaced. Yeah, I saw them together a couple of times. But look, it's none of my business who sleeps with whom, you know? Of course. Terrell made a note in his notebook. Mr. Ford, I'm going to ask you a direct question. Did Jamal Omowole know about his HIV status before his wife found out she was infected? Raymond shifted uncomfortably in his chair. I'm not sure I can... Mr. Ford, this is very important for the investigation. If you know anything, you are obligated to tell me. Raymond took a deep breath. About 2 months ago, Jamal came to work acting strange. We were smoking in the backyard and he said he was in a bind. He said he'd had some tests done and the results were very bad. Did he say specifically that he had HIV? Not directly, but he talked about his damn immune system and how this shit was with him now for good, and he asked how it would affect his insurance. Raymond shook his head. I advised him to see a doctor, but he waved it off, said he needed to think about it. Did he mention his wife? Yeah, he said Imani would kill him if she found out, that she's got a thing about disease because of her mother. Raymond looked at Terrell. Listen, I didn't think he meant it literally. People say all kinds of things in situations like that. Of course. Terrell made another note. Did he say anything about telling his wife? He just said he needed time to think things over. Raymond paused. But he was still seeing that waitress. I saw them together a week ago. Terrell put down his pen. So, knowing about his illness, he continued to have an extramarital affair and presumably an intimate relationship with his wife. It appears so, Raymond admitted reluctantly. Thank you, Mr. Ford. Your testimony is very valuable. After Raymond left, Terrell sat for a while, staring into space. The case was taking a new turn. If Jamal knew about his HIV status and deliberately exposed his wife to the risk of infection, it could qualify as intentional infliction of bodily harm. For Imani, this could be a serious mitigating factor. He picked up the phone and dialed a number. Hamilton Memorial Hospital, this is Detective Terrell. May I speak to Dr. Nguyen? I need some information about a patient named Jamal Omowole. 10 minutes later, Terrell had new information. Hospital tests confirmed that Jamal was HIV positive, and his viral load indicated that he had been infected long before his wife. The next step was a visit to the isolation ward where Imani was being held. When she was brought into the meeting room, Terrell was struck by the change. The calm, collected woman he had seen 3 days earlier was gone. Sitting before him was a broken creature with dead eyes and trembling hands. Mrs. Omowole, how are you feeling? He asked, sitting down opposite her. Imani looked up at him. Like someone who has been sentenced to death and then locked in a cage. Did the doctor examine you? Yes, he confirmed the diagnosis. She smiled grimly. What difference does it make now? I'm here to tell you that we have new information. Your husband knew about his HIV status at least 2 months before the incident. Imani gasped. What? His colleague Raymond Ford testified that Jamal discussed his diagnosis with him. What's more, knowing about his illness, your husband continued to have an extramarital affair. Imani covered her face with her hands. God. He knew. He knew all this time and said nothing. She looked up at Terrell. What will happen to me now? That depends on many factors. Intentionally infecting someone with HIV is a serious crime. That could be a mitigating factor in your case. And what about what I did to him? You are charged with aggravated assault. But considering all the circumstances, including your state of mind and your amnesia, your lawyer may be able to argue for a lesser charge. Imani nodded, but her eyes remained lifeless. You know what the worst part is, Detective? I don't remember anything. Absolutely nothing. It's as if someone else took control of my body. She paused. But at the same time, part of me understands why it happened. The part that lived in fear of illness for years. It's as if I'm split in two. One Imani is horrified by what she did, and the other thinks he deserved it. Terrell looked at her intently. Have you ever had a psychiatric evaluation, Mrs. Omowole? I've always been afraid of being diagnosed with something. Another illness, you know? She shook her head. It's ironic, isn't it? I've been afraid of getting sick my whole life, and now my problem is in my head. That's not necessarily true. Severe stress can cause reactions that aren't considered illnesses. Are you saying that anyone in my position would have done the same thing? Her voice was bitter. Number. But your case is unique. Childhood trauma, a phobia of illness, your husband's betrayal, your HIV diagnosis. All of that together created a perfect storm. Imani was silent for a moment, then asked, "Have you been in touch with Jamal? How is he?" "Physically, he's stable. Psychologically, he has a long road ahead of him." "So do I," Imani said quietly. "You'll be seeing a psychiatrist, Dr. Morgan. He'll conduct an evaluation that could be crucial to your case." "What do you think, Detective?" Imani asked suddenly. "You've seen a lot of criminals. Am I one of them?" Terrell thought about it. In 20 years on the job, he had seen many criminals, cold-blooded killers, rapists, robbers, but Imani was unlike any of them. "I think you're a person who found herself in an unbearable situation. You did something terrible, but the circumstances were exceptional." Imani nodded and lowered her head. "Thank you for your honesty." As Terrell left the holding cell, his thoughts were in turmoil. On the one hand, the law was the law. Imani Omowole had committed a serious crime. On the other hand, knowing all the circumstances, could he blame her? If he had been put in her situation? Terrell shook his head, dismissing these thoughts. His job was to gather the facts. The court would decide. A week later, the results of the psychiatric evaluation landed on Terrell's desk. Dr. Morgan diagnosed Imani Omowole with acute stress reaction followed by dissociative amnesia. In his opinion, at the time of the attack on her husband, she was in a state of temporary mental confusion and was unable to fully understand the nature of her actions or control them. This conclusion, coupled with new testimony that Jamal Omowole knew about his HIV status and deliberately exposed his wife to the risk of infection, significantly changed the picture of the case. Terrell closed the file and looked at his watch. There were 2 hours left before the hearing. The Hamilton County Courthouse was an old red brick building with columns at the entrance. The courtroom was crowded with journalists, onlookers, and lawyers. The Omowole case had attracted a lot of public attention. Terrell sat in the front row, watching as Imani was led into the courtroom. She looked small and fragile in her prison uniform. Next to her sat her lawyer, Marcus Jennings, a well-known criminal defense attorney. On the opposite side of the courtroom, leaning on a cane, sat Jamal. Their eyes met for a moment, and Terrell saw a mixture of pain, fear, and guilt. Judge Eleonora Ramirez, a stern woman with a piercing gaze, took her seat. "The State of Illinois versus Imani Omowole," announced the court clerk. The prosecutor, Heather Collins, rose from her seat. "Your Honor, the prosecution believes that despite the mitigating circumstances, the defendant's actions constitute aggravated assault. We are seeking a 5-year sentence." Marcus Jennings stood up next. "Your Honor, the defense insists that my client was acting in a state of temporary insanity caused by exceptional circumstances. A psychiatric evaluation confirms this. Furthermore, her husband, Jamal Omowole, knowingly exposed her to the risk of HIV infection by concealing his diagnosis. This is a separate criminal offense that served as a catalyst for the events." He paused. "We ask the court to take all these circumstances into account and impose a suspended sentence with mandatory psychiatric treatment." Judge Ramirez listened carefully to both sides, then turned to Imani. "Mrs. Omowole, do you have anything to say before the verdict is handed down?" Imani slowly stood up, her hands shaking. "Your Honor, I can't say I'm not guilty. I caused terrible harm to a man I once loved." Her voice was quiet but firm. "I am a nurse. I have dedicated my life to helping people, to alleviating their suffering. What I did goes against everything I believe in." She took a deep breath. "I don't remember the moment of the attack, but I accept responsibility for my actions. All I ask is the opportunity to get the help I obviously need." The judge nodded and looked at Jamal. "Mr. Omowole, the court has taken your testimony and the medical reports into consideration. Do you have anything else to add?" Jamal struggled to his feet, leaning on his cane. "Your Honor, I owe Imani. I knew about my diagnosis and didn't tell her. I put her health at risk out of fear and selfishness." He looked at his ex-wife. "What she did was terrible, but I understand why she did it. I don't want her to spend years in prison because of my mistake." Silence fell over the courtroom. Judge Ramirez studied the documents in front of her, then looked up. "This is a difficult case in which there is no clear right or wrong. The law requires punishment for the crime committed, but it also allows for consideration of the circumstances." She looked at Imani. "Mrs. Omowole, the court finds you guilty of causing serious bodily harm. However, considering the psychiatric evaluation, the testimony of the witnesses, and the circumstances of the case, I am sentencing you to 3 years probation with mandatory psychiatric treatment and 500 hours of community service." A whisper ran through the courtroom. Imani closed her eyes, her shoulders slumping, not in disappointment, but in relief. The judge continued. "As for you, Mr. Omowole, the district attorney has initiated a separate case for intentionally exposing someone to HIV. You will be charged accordingly." She banged the gavel. "The court is adjourned." As the courtroom began to empty, Terrell watched Imani whisper something to her lawyer. She looked exhausted, but there was something new in her eyes. Not joy, not relief, but perhaps the first glimmer of hope. Jamal, leaning on his cane, slowly made his way to the exit. For a moment, his path crossed Imani's. They stood a few steps apart, former spouses now bound not by love, but by a shared tragedy. "I'm sorry," Jamal said quietly. Imani looked at him for a long time, then nodded slightly. "Me too." They went their separate ways, each to their new life, forever changed by one terrible day. Terrell stepped out of the courtroom into the bright sunlight. His work as a detective had taught him that there was no such thing as absolute good or evil in the world, only people making choices in difficult circumstances. And sometimes even the most ordinary people were capable of terrible acts when driven to despair by fear and pain. The Omowole case was closed, but Terrell knew it would haunt him for a long time to come, a reminder of how thin the line between sanity and madness is, and how easily any of us can cross that line when we find ourselves in the right or wrong circumstances.